right, whenever you're ready.
Welcome everyone to our event tonight. We're here with Kathryn Purcell and her husband Maury, who will be discussing her memoir, There's Something Wrong With Us. And about our author tonight, born and raised in Greenville, South Carolina, Kathryn attended Furman University, where she received her BA and MBA degrees. Her extensive training with healthcare providers raised her awareness of the mental health issues discussed in this book. More importantly, her interaction and access to these professionals gave her the direction and much needed resolve to confidently pursue a wrongful death suit against a hospital system intent on avoiding blame while engaged in a cover-up. That and the mental illness that ran in her family were the reasons she chose to write about her life. Because of her interest in the impact of mental health issues on families, she and husband Maury are passionate supporters of Thornwell. This 146-year-old organization is dedicated to helping abused and abandoned children, as well as helping families deal with life struggles. Our volunteer interests include mentoring elementary school children, visiting shut-ins, and working with churches to put on job fairs focused on those needing a second chance. Kathryn enjoys cooking, golfing, and reading. She and Maury live in Hilton Head, South Carolina, with their two adorable dogs, Ruby and Jack. Thank you, everyone. Welcome, Kathryn and Maury.
Thank you.
Thank you, Brooke and Jonathan, for having us here this evening. Maury and I are huge Pat Conroy fans, as I'm sure all of you are too. So with no further ado, take it away.
Thank you. Likewise, I'm delighted to be here. This will be a very friendly interview. If it's not, I'm going to have to find my own way back to Hilton Head. So, to quote Leo Tolstoy, it's on the back of Kathryn's book, all happy families are alike, but every unhappy family is unhappy in their own way. There's Something Wrong With Us is a story of your unhappy family. There's an event you write about that transcended any other moment in your life. This memoir is set in Greenville, South Carolina, focuses on the mental illnesses of your family, dating back several generations. Kathryn talks about the impact it had on her family dynamics and how one event changed her family forever. So I think she's going to read us part from the prologue.
Mom, she looks gray. I've just walked into my sister's hospital room where she is in recovery from surgery. Elise is not moving and appears to be asleep. Or is she? She had a difficult recovery, my mother quickly replies. The nurse just gave her a shot of Demerol and Phenergan, and she's resting comfortably now. Again, I say, but she looks awfully gray. Thinking my mother would understand, I meant deathly. But Mom doesn't, and I started to feel alarmed. I leave the room to get a nurse, and when we return, the nurse goes about tucking in Elise's top sheet and gently asking her to wake up. Wake up, sweetheart, she repeats several times. I start to think I've overreacted because the nurse is clearly not seeing my sister's appearance as indicating the emergency I thought it was. But to me, Elise doesn't appear to be breathing, and yet I don't see the nurse checking for a pulse. She acts as if it's typical of a post-surgical patient having had a lot of pain medication to not wake up or not even show signs of waking up. But is it? Suddenly, the nurse's facial expression changes, now registering that something is wrong here, that there really is an emergency situation. Clearly alarmed, she moves quickly to code Elise, pressing a button on the wall to signal responders that help is needed immediately. At the same time, she turns to me and my mother and demands that we leave the room. I'm familiar with the code blue alert she has just set in motion. It's used whenever a patient's heart stops beating or respiration is not detected. All available doctors, nurses, and respiratory technicians are then required to respond and give immediate assistance, and they do. Now in the hallway, we see two crash carts quickly arrive. but their drivers seemed confused about which room the code was for. We point them to the right one. Then the nurse in her haste, did the nurse in her haste to send the code forget the room number? Other providers streamed down the hall to assist. There are so many people, and all my mother and I can do is stand and watch.
This is a story written like a novel, and that was the opinion of Kathryn's editor, Nancy Marriott. She weaves the historical facts about places described in and around the upstate as well as people. We have a range of everybody from Lindsey Graham to shoeless Joe Jackson. There's also a fair amount of quirky Southern humor in here, right?
There is. And this,
You haven't heard it yet.
because we're in the South, right?
Yeah.
Well, this book could definitely have just been a huge downer, but I was able to overcome a lot of adversity, and it was with the help of a lot of people that God placed in my life to encourage me and not give up on me and support me. And for them, every one of them would throw me a lifeline, and I tried to catch each one.
So why don't you tell everybody why you wrote it?
I wrote it because there was a lot of emotional abuse in my family caused by my mother. And I'll use a term that's probably overused, overworked, misused, but she was very narcissistic. And what I mean by that is she did not have the capacity for empathy, to show approval, or affirmation. And the impact it had on us kids was low self-esteem. And we did not know how to socialize with others. And so that was a big detriment.
I think many experts in Kathryn's study, when she wrote this, have noted that emotional abuse is every bit as harmful as physical or sexual abuse, but the scars are left on the inside, so there's no proof. You have a quote, I think, from Postcards of the Edge, the movie, that's also in your book.
Yeah, the main character at one point said, "There's nothing you can say more horrible that I don't already say to myself," and that's how I felt.
I know, it surprised us both. A lot of people have come up to Kathryn, men and women, and have emailed her and told her about how her story resonated with them, and how they also dealt with similar situations. And I think that was a surprise to us.
It was a big surprise, and not just situations like mine, but just people that wanted to come up and talk to me about any mental health issues that was running in their family or that was occurring with them. And I felt like, I really welcome that, because I think we can all help each other.
Yeah.
So why don't you tell everybody what your parents were like? They couldn't have been more polar opposites, could they?
You know, my dad was a very kind, generous, humble man, and he had a servant's heart.
He was a natural leader.
He was in sports as well as in combat, and a very funny man too. But in contrast, my mom was more introverted, very independent, more self-centered.
She told you something in her kitchen one day. You were about 35.
I was, and it summed up pretty much how my mom thought about others and herself. She said, I don't care how things affect other people. I only care how they affect me.
So that ought to tell you a lot. Their backgrounds were polar opposites too. Your dad was about 12 years older than your mom.
He was, and he was born in a little town called Due West, South Carolina, and he was born into an affluent family. He went to Erskine College there in town, and he lettered in 3 sports. He was a very accomplished athlete. He lettered in football, basketball, baseball, and after he graduated, he was drafted by the Pittsburgh Pirates. And he turned them down and said, "Man, I gotta go make some money." And back then, he could make more money teaching high school English and coaching.
So
Imagine that.
Pearl Harbor was bombed on your dad's birthday.
Yeah,
And that changed a lot of things.
it did. And he duty called, and he enlisted in the Army, and he was recruited to go to officer school and became a bomber pilot. And he led the largest air armada into the Battle of the Bulge.
Wow.
3,000 claims.
Over 3,000 claims, and he and his bombardier, Don Kilberg, won the distinguished
Were awarded.
awarded the Distinguished Flying Crosses for that mission.
More telling about her dad was that they were required to fly 30 missions. He flew his 30, and he inherited a crew that had 5 missions short. So he said, I'm not leaving until I get them their extra 5 missions. So he flew an extra 5 missions, and he was proud he got every one of them home, and he didn't lose a guy in all 35 missions. That's the kind of guy he was.
Yeah, and then he came back to South Carolina, where he fought a different battle, and that was with PTSD. But he did manage to go to pharmacy school at the University of South Carolina and graduated. Then he came came to Greenville and worked at a pharmacy under his uncle's tutelage
Before he bought his own.
before he bought his own store.
He was also known to have a great sense of humor. Your dad loved to laugh. I think you have a story for us.
I do, and he loved to go to the University of South Carolina football games. And so let me read you a little story here. He's very quick-witted. One day when Dad got off work late, he hurriedly collected his buddies and started the 2-hour trip to Columbia. Realizing it might be better to use excessive speed on the back roads and avoid game day traffic with a surplus of police patrolling, he sped through the countryside trying to make up for lost time. About halfway there, he got pulled over by a local cop who looked and talked a lot like the prototype Southern lawman, drawl and all. Sonny, he said, when Dad rolled down his window, you were flying pretty low. Do you have a pilot's license? And Dad grinned, reached in his wallet, and produced his pilot's license. As a matter of fact, I did. No one in the car was sure how this cop was going to react, least of all Dad. The policeman stood there for a moment, then burst out laughing. Son, slow that vehicle down.
Now, your mom, by contrast, grew up poor in rural Lawndale, North Carolina.
She did. And her parents were farmers. Her father was also a Baptist minister. And Mom didn't have a lot of childhood friends. She had cats, and so she dressed them up in doll clothing. Yeah, that was kind of odd, but Mom was aloof, but she was very beautiful and was doted on by many of the relatives in her area. And I think she came to expect that, maybe
From
from
everybody.
others. Yeah,
So she went on to college.
she did. She came, she ventured 75 miles south and came to Greenville, South Carolina, and got her degree in education from Vernon.
How would you describe your mom's treatment of you 3 kids? You, Elise, and Mike.
You know, cruel comes to mind. She could be very vindictive, and I felt like she was a bully. And let me give you some examples of the behavior, and I don't want to pile on, but she was very critical of us kids without balancing out any of that with praise. And that
Called you names.
she did. She called us names. There were derogatory names, and she would make fun of us by mocking us and make faces when we were disappointed at something that she didn't, that she'd give some what am I trying to say, correction, a punishment that she was trying to dole out, and we weren't allowed to react to that. And so
She compared you to Tommy Smothers.
and she thought he was kind of stupid or slow,
Mhm.
so she compared me to someone like that, and it just had a real hard impact on us kids. It's hard to feel good about yourself when you're constantly being criticized.
And no wonder, I know you as an adult struggled with constructive criticism when it was warranted.
What are you talking about?
Anyway, times in our kitchen were interesting sometimes. She didn't do these things in front of your dad, though.
No, she didn't, and that's what led me to believe it was more calculated.
She didn't allow you to socialize with others,
She didn't. Now we socialized at school,
At school.
of course,
but in the
but
neighborhoods.
not in the neighborhood. kids, no. She limited our contact with other people. In fact, we hardly ever met up or played with relatives. I don't even know my cousins. I know their names. I mean, I might have met them once, but that's pretty much it. But the only relatives we were allowed to see were her parents, my grandparents, and thank goodness for that, because I liked them.
An odd thing that blew me away, she did not acknowledge your birthdays.
No, she did not even dance.
No.
Yeah.
What do you think?
Why do I think? You know, I wondered if she just, if the day we were born was just not that memorable or worthy of being happy about. I don't know.
Yeah.
That's a good question.
How did you three deal with her?
Well, in different ways. My sister, the oldest, was very compliant, and so she would do whatever mom asked her to do, and then go do whatever she wanted to do behind her back. And then my brother, in the middle, he just withdrew from her, and then got away as soon as he could, fled Greenville, which worked. I, on the other hand, was a bit of a rebel, and I did not. I was intent on letting her know that what she was doing was hurtful, and it was mean, and it was cruel, and I would tell her that. And that was not a winning approach, because I paid a heavy toll for that.
There's a history of mental illness in your family, right?
There is.
In your mom's family.
Yes, and it goes back multiple generations, but on her father's side, Seth was the eldest of 6 kids, and 3 out of the 6 were mentally ill. Now let me explain what I mean by that. The youngest kid, Johnny, was institutionalized for over 30 years. He was a mental institution. He had 2 sisters that were that never left their drafty farmhouse, and they would only eat boiled eggs and bread. And whenever we would go visit them, even as early as when I was 5 years old, I thought that was so odd, so weird. And they would come to the door with these tattered clothes on.
Yeah, it's definitely strange. Let's talk about your sister Elise for a minute and her struggles with mental illness.
Elise, she
She was the oldest.
She's the oldest, and she started exhibiting some bizarre behavior by the time she was 3. And my dad said one day she crawled over and she bit Sport, the boxer, on the ear until he bled. And if Dad had not been there to scoop her up, the dog would have mauled her. And then, as time went on, Elise got where she would become enraged easily. And it wasn't just like irritated or angry. I mean, it was full rage. And the way she would react is that she would, if she saw Mike or I, she'd pick a fight and then claw us. And when we would try to tell Mom, she would just say, "You need to give Elise her space. She just leave her alone." And that led to
She matured.
Yeah, well, she also did it with the horses.
Yeah. Oh, that's right. Yeah.
When we both rode, and she would be riding. If the horse did something she didn't like, she would drop the reins and start scratching and clawing the horse. I mean, can you imagine what that horse thought? I mean, I know what I thought.
Yeah. And as she got older.
And as she got older, got more involved in high-risk behavior. And what I mean by that is kind of reckless driving too fast, taking too many chances, promiscuity, got into drugs. She ended up overdosing when she was at medical school and had to drop out. And she didn't even want to go to medical school. I think she did that just because she was trying to please Mom.
Yeah. She was brilliant, though.
She was very brilliant, a very brilliant, beautiful woman.
Real overachiever. Yeah. Later on, she was diagnosed, finally, properly and treated.
Yes, she was. She was misdiagnosed in her 20s with schizophrenia, and then she was finally diagnosed with what we thought was the correct diagnosis, bipolar. And then they put her on therapy, and she told me, "This is the best I've ever felt in my life." I was so happy for her.
She was how old then?
She was about 35 at the time.
It's all those years.
All those years.
Changing gears a little bit, how did humor play a role in your life? Anybody knows us knows we like to laugh.
Yeah, I do. I love it, and I got that from my dad because he's very very funny and loves to laugh. And I loved hanging out with him, and that accomplished two things. I got to be around him, and it got me away from Mom.
Yeah.
So Dad had his own drugstore, and so I would go to the store and hang out with him. And we would laugh, share stories that we would laugh about. And one day, this is how he could laugh at himself, a doctor's office called, and they were calling in a prescription for Mr. Muckenfoos. And I'll just let that hang. Anyway, that's names fraught with peril. Anyway, Dad got busy filling the prescription, counting out the pills, and he kept saying Muckenfoos, Muckenfoos, Muckenfoos over and over and over. And then he picked up the phone and he called the man and blurted out the wrong pronunciation. And the look on his face was sheer panic. Well, I took off to the stock room because I was laughing like a maniac. And I figured I was going to have to leave Dad to figure that one out. But we laughed about that story so many times.
Kathryn's mom did not have a sense of humor, but she had some harebrained ideas that were a source of some humor later. I think you have one you're going to share.
I do, and let me give you the background on this one. When I was 6 years old, my mom bought me a donkey, and I named her Speedy Kate, after Mom. I don't know why. And but at the same time, she bought my sister a horse. And about a year later, she decided that Speedy needed to be banished to the farm up in North Carolina, an hour and a half away. I don't know why. Speedy had to go, and Elisa's horse got to stay, but anyway. So we're going to join this story with how my mom wants to haul Speedy to the farm. She's telling my dad, a good way to save money would be to haul Speedy in the back of our 4-door 57 Ford sedan. This is a 500-pound creature. We could take out the back seat and she'd have plenty of room. A week later, Dad drove Speedy up to Lawndale while Elise fed her apples from the front seat. My donkey kept her head out the window most of the trip. She ate, pooped, and brayed the whole way. Mom, Mike, and I followed the chase car, our station wagon, and watched all the funny looks passers-by gave Dad when they realized he was hauling an ass. It took most people a second glance to process what they were seeing, but when they did, they usually laughed, stared, or pointed. Can you imagine driving on a major highway and passing this spectacle? After we got to the farm, I'm not sure who exited the Ford first, Elise, Dad, or Speedy. Once everyone was settled and we visited with the grandparents, we left the blue and white Ford parked at the farm before getting in the station wagon to go home. I never saw that Ford again. I'm quite sure it was not salvageable.
Speaking of humor, how did you enjoy writing about your dating life and downhill dating?
I really didn't, because it was so pitiful. I was attracting a lot of self-absorbed people, mainly guys. And so when I met you, I thought you were too good to be true because you weren't. And the other thought that came to mind was, if you're interested in me, what's wrong with you?
My answer was nothing. So how would you describe our early relationship?
I think we started out buddies. I think we were real buddies, and I felt like I had an ally in you.
But you didn't want to marry me.
I didn't, and it's not because I didn't think you were wonderful. It was because I had a low opinion of myself, and I also didn't want to have kids. And not, let me explain that, because I was afraid if I brought a child into the world, I might treat that kid like I was treated, and I didn't trust myself.
And we found out that that is not uncommon of daughters of women or daughters who have been mistreated by their mothers. But we talked about it, aired it out, and we decided I wanted you with kids or no kids, and 33 and a half years later, we're still standing. So there you go.
Yeah. So far.
So far. After, we'll see how it goes. But we were a team.
We were.
Yeah.
Are.
we were a team, but we've had some disagreements come up over time, some minor skirmishes. I don't know if there's anything you want to talk about there. I'd assume you wouldn't, but
Yeah.
just in case you want to pull out a dagger and stick it in, if you have one you'd like to do?
I have a little story here.
All right.
And Maury has a really great sense of humor, which we have enjoyed a lot of laughs. But let me give you a little background on this story. We had only been married a year, and we had this ritual of going out to eat Chinese food every Friday night. And then we would go to Baskin and Robbins and get our favorite ice cream. And earlier in the week, I had heard on the radio Baskin and Robbins had a brand new flavor. And I thought, this sounds good. And I told him, I said, we should try the new flavor, and you agreed. So here we are pulling into Baskin and Robbins. Maury pulled into the parking lot and said, you sit here and listen to the radio and I'll run in and get it. A few minutes later, he returned and we pulled out to go home to watch Winter Kills, a movie we'd rented. As we drove along, I said in a confirming tone, so you got the Jamocha almond fudge? He looked at me with a clueless expression. What? No, I got the chocolate and peanut butter. That's what we always get. But don't you remember we talked about getting the new flavor? No. So, I went on to remind him we talked about it Tuesday evening over dinner. You said it was a good idea. I could even remember how the conversation came up and what else we discussed. I might have gone a little too far with the details because as we drove down Edwards Road, 5 blocks from our condo, Maury suddenly presses the button to lower his window and calmly tosses the carton of ice cream out. That was when I discovered Maury had a temper and used creative ways to express it.
What can I say?
I have other stories.
How did we deal with your mother as a couple?
Not very well. My mom was a very difficult person to deal with. And you learned early on how vindictive she could be.
I did.
As early as when we were planning the wedding. Maury and I had decided we wanted a small wedding. We were paying for it, and we only wanted about 75 people there. So, out of respect, I took the guest list to my mom, and I said, look this over and see if there's anybody on there I might have left off. Well, she took one look at it, and she said, I can't possibly go to your wedding. You have not listed all of your father's customers, past and present. And I said, Mom, that's hundreds and hundreds of people. That would be so expensive. And not only that, these people don't even know me. They're going to think I just want a gift. So she said, well, I can't possibly go to your wedding, and just walked off. So I called you, and I was upset. But I was mainly upset because I was afraid she was going to tell Dad that he couldn't come to my wedding. And so I stopped off at the drugstore to talk to him. And he said, babe, I'm going to walk you down the aisle, and your ma is going to be there. And he said it with such conviction, I knew I could count on him. But I also knew she was going to retaliate, and she did.
Our reception was a great party. We had it at the City Club in Greenville. We had a piano player who was fantastic. Everybody was having a good time, and her mom probably set a record for the earliest a mother of the bride ever left a reception. Barely an hour into it, she left and dragged John out with her, which was
And didn't even say goodbye.
didn't even say goodbye. So that was her retaliation.
Yeah. And then she threw away the top of our wedding cake while we were on our honeymoon.
That's right. Yeah. So it was a little bumpy. Changing gears a little bit. This is a tougher topic. Let's talk about the years 2000, 2007, the final years you write about in the book. And I want you to share with everybody a little bit what that was like.
Yeah, that was really hard. In 2000, Elise, my sister, died unexpectedly in the hospital after her hysterectomy. And
She really started to find herself too, which made it really tough.
yeah, she did. She had a great job that she loved. She had girlfriends that she did things with. They traveled together. She was on a treatment for her bipolar that made her feel normal. And then, we were also, the three of us were starting to develop a really nice friendship, and
As
we
adults,
did things
yeah.
together.
Yeah.
But then perimenopause hit, and she started having these mood swings, and it was probably prompted by the change in hormone levels. And so, her doctors recommended that she get a hysterectomy, and maybe that could put her into surgical menopause, and maybe that would work for her. So we all agreed that sounded like a great idea. So she came to Greenville to get the procedure and then died soon after the hysterectomy.
Her death was tough on all of you.
It was. I know the loss of a child is one of the, if not the worst thing that anybody can go through, and that was part of it. But the way Mom and Dad grieved caused a lot of problems with Dad, because Mom did not want to share grief with anyone, any of us, even Dad. And Dad wanted to share his grief with all of us, especially her. And I think by not allowing him to grieve with her, I think that was every bit as harmful as losing Elise.
Yeah.
And I could see it, the change in him. It's the beginning of a downward spiral for him into dementia.
But you channeled your grief a different way.
I did. I really wanted to find out what happened to Elise, and because I had been in pharma sales, I was calling on a lot of doctors and nurses at the time, but when I shared with them the story of what happened in the hospital, of what I witnessed in the hospital before we really found out what happened, they said, "You've got to pursue this." So I did.
You did. You became obsessed.
I did, and part of it, I think, was because I felt like I was becoming more of a punching bag for Mom, and I'm sure that was a lot of grief, but I also felt like the wrong daughter had died.
You did. And 5 years later,
I lost Dad, and unexpectedly, and then 15 months later, I lost Mom, and all three deaths happened in a hospital unexpectedly and suddenly, and I was there when they all three happened, and I just felt helpless to help any of them.
this was, you thought God was punishing you.
I did. I really did.
This was 2007. You wrote the book in 19, started in 19, and finished it in late 2020. And you have a final chapter called Reflections. And would you like to share a little bit about that when you wrote the final chapter?
Yeah. When I wrote the chapter, I was really thinking that I was focusing on healing, which is in that subtitle. But when I wrote it, I was still angry. I was still really mad. I didn't see that there was any healing taking place. So I put the book aside, and we were in a process of moving here in December of 2020. And so once we got here, and now we're living in paradise. This place has always been so tranquil and offered me so much peace that I started to mellow. And after a few months, I woke up one day and I felt totally different about my mom. I felt nothing but sorrow and compassion towards her because I knew she lived an unfulfilled life. And I think she knew that too, because before she died, I called her one day. It was a few months before she died. I called her and she said, "You know, I woke up this morning thinking about every wrong thing I've ever done in my life." And that broke my heart. I thought, oh my gosh, I mean, here we are at this stage of the game. And I knew I didn't want to live a life like that.
Yeah.
So I changed how I felt, and I wrote differently in the last chapter about her. But it also filled me with so much gratitude for the people that God placed in my life. And I write about those people. And I readily see going forward all the people that are in my life now that have given me so many gifts.
Are there any here?
I think there are. There's one right here to my left, Tony Benfeld, and she was with me as I wrote the whole book and gave me terrific feedback.
And it was professional advice too, because Tony will be quick to tell you she minored in psychology.
And then my neighbors here, Rob and Yanina Cushman, are new angels in my life. So thank you for being here. I'm an angel.
Yeah, thank you.
I'm an angel
Thank
to
you
my
for
right.
Love you, babe.
Love you
Proud of
too.
you. Finishing, much of the literature about childhood emotional abuse reports that there's not a lot consistently reported in it because it's so hard to define. But the conservative estimates place it at about 14% of children reporting emotional abuse before the age of 18. That's why Kathryn and I are so passionate about Thornhill and the work it's doing out of Clinton, South Carolina. Serving children and families in counseling, foster care, and now training families how to try to stay together and manage their stress so they keep the family intact. So that's it from us, unless you have anything else. And we're just so thankful to be here, and thank you all for coming
Yes,
in.
thank you for
If you have any
coming.
questions, fire away. Yes, sir, in the back.
Were there any other members of your family who were diagnosed with something like bipolar, or it's just the agony that you've just been discussing?
Yeah, I have a cousin that's been diagnosed with schizophrenia, and she will never be able to live independently, and she's also on my mother's side of the family. So it must be something genetic, I think. Yeah.
Yeah, hi.
Yeah.
First of all, we've got near identical backstories. There is a difference in that your dad sounds like a strong man.
He
Yes.
But if
was.
you sought out, what did he do when you sought out his support, if indeed you did seek out his support?
Good
Yeah,
question.
Yeah, whenever I did, he solidly backed me. I didn't run to dad a lot, just because mom made it clear to us she was the final authority. But when it got so bad, like the wedding experience, and I knew that it was so important to me that he walked me down the aisle, I knew I had to get him involved. And then there's another time that I talk about that she was so hurtful that I had to seek him out to help me, and he did.
You left home for about 2 months.
I did. I was a sophomore at Furman, and she was just so cruel. I left, and he asked me please to come home, and I said, I can't live with her. And he said, I will run interference, and he did.
But she was very conniving. She would usually do these things behind his back. And then she would have memories of events that were totally different than what actually happened or what everybody else said they thought happened. You're turning looking. Does that sound familiar?
I've written a book as well. Tracy, I've just finished it. Tracy's been editing it, so she's fairly aware.
Yes,
The similarities are remarkable.
Oh my gosh.
Unbelievable.
The difference is you being female, me being male.
Yes.
It doesn't just happen to mothers
No,
and women, it
no,
happens to mothers and sons.
No, we have had, when we did our talk at the Rotary Club, there was a man that came up and said the same thing you did, and his stepmother was very narcissistic, and just to hear him talk, I could see the wounds were still there. I mean, I don't think ever really totally get over it, you just learn to deal with it, and I do feel that way.
I think the scars are permanent. You
I think
try and
you're
deal
right.
with them, you try to manage it, and the scars are permanent. And sometimes I will find myself reacting in a certain way, whether it's to Tracy or somebody else, and you go, I know where I got that from, and it's not good.
Yeah,
And you try and manage it and not repeat it, but inevitably you're waiting for the next time that you do, and you know exactly where it's come from.
yeah.
It's just in the genes, isn't it? It's
Yeah.
genetic.
Yeah.
Did your,
No, go ahead.
I'm sorry,
Go.
in Peter's family, his younger sister was kind of, if you want the weaker link, the insecurity was a lot. She didn't process it, and I think the mother knew she was weaker, so she picked on her. Was it kind of, were you that person? Because it sounds like your sister just, as sweet as pie, went off and did her own thing.
That's exactly right.
Yeah, yeah, and I think I became the punching bag too because I'd stand into her. I was so angry at her for being so cruel and breaking promises, I mean serious promises. And I'm sure she did it more to me than the other kids because I was being punished for talking back or whatever she wanted to call it.
Did you feel like your father ducked every once in a while? I mean, because he was in an untenable position. I mean, that life, did you feel that?
Did I feel like he
Like he ducked?
dumped? You know, I struggle with that, and I don't know that he ducked. If I had gone to him more often, I think he would have taken up for me more, but mom was so calculated, again, I'll use that word, and how she treated us in front of him versus behind him. And I always felt like, I mean, he loved Mom, he loved her dearly. I always felt like they were a couple first before they were a group. So I didn't wanna just play that card routinely. And one other thing too, Dad worked a lot.
Yeah, he did work a
He
lot of
did,
long hours.
And I realized growing up, he suffered with PTSD because we could hear him calling out in the night with nightmares. And so he was struggling with that whole issue and working long hours trying to provide a living because he was the breadwinner.
Your mom would also lay in wait for him at night sometimes when he'd get back from the store too.
Yeah, and pounce on him when he came in the back door. And we could,
Same thing.
and she would close the doors to the kitchen so they could argue, and we kids would sit on the steps, and we knew, but we were worried they'd break up. I didn't want to go with her.
I tell you though, that reading the book was great, because it brings all of the things that you're talking about, from the start to the end, and the reflections, it was great.
Good, thank you. I know.
So, do I purchase the book tonight? Do you have some?
Yes, we do. Oh, absolutely. Good question.
So, that would be number one. My name is Paulette, and I do identify thank y'all for being here, because growing up for me, it was kind of, have you ever felt that way where, I noticed you talk about just telling your dad maybe 2 major times, but some of it could have been that you didn't want to put too much stress on your dad, where it would be my mom, and that, like, my mom would be at work, and sometimes my dad might do something, but I just didn't even want to bring it to her, so I tried to deal with it myself.
Yeah.
Because then they get to fighting, and so it was that feeling of like you're mixed. And as a child, it was like, we didn't go to church all the time, wasn't sent to church, but I went to religious instruction. But I used to wonder, like, if there's a God, why is my household like this? So it was my conflict between a spiritual walk and, I'm like, wait a minute, dude, what's happening? You're loving, caring, and kind. But what I found out from just my life is that the forgiving piece, forgiving people no matter what, the harm I caused to people and the harm that they caused to me. Because I didn't speak to my dad for years, but I found that when I was able to forgive him, just forgive him.
It's
That
liberating.
allowed-
It
Yeah.
It's more for you.
Yes.
It's more for
No
you.
matter what, because from wherever their upbringing, whatever happened them like that, and then at 19, my son was diagnosed with bipolar. That's why
I could tell you,
That
you were nodding when I said that.
he's no longer here with us. He died at 25, but it's good that your sister had found something that would work for her, because I find that, with that mental illness, they don't have, they have it, but it's hard for either a person to receive it or, well, that's just been our struggle. So it's good to know that y'all have that, that y'all affiliated with that group, because I would like to find out more about it. Just because we now have a 501c for mental illness on behalf of my son. Yeah, he passed at 25, and like when he showed up, I felt like a Mack truck had hit me, because I was like, well, where did this come from? Who has it? What, So, but we have to be able to love through the whole process.
I agree.
Yeah.
I agree. I mean, I felt such peace when I was able to let go of that anger and hurt.
Yeah. But thank y'all for being here.
Thank you.
Oh, thank
And I will
you.
purchase the book.
Yes, go ahead.
Yes, I have 2 questions. The first is, did your mother ever have a conversation with you, a regular conversation? Or was it always, do this, don't do that, or just so sterile? Yes, I
Yeah,
can
it was,
relate to
yeah, it
that.
was always kind of, direct, one way, one direction.
She said, this
Yeah,
is not
I-
a democracy,
This
right?
is not a democracy, you
Yeah.
cannot get a vote, yeah, that was the
Yeah,
favorite thing to
it's always
say.
do this, don't do that. Well, how about when you were an adult? Was it the same way?
My mother would never answer a question,
Yeah,
ever.
yeah.
And if I ask her a question, she would sit there and look at me with the most expressionless look.
Oh my, how chilling,
Yeah.
how awful. Okay, my second question, with the 3 deaths in the hospital, was that ever pursued?
Yeah.
I thought you said
The
it
sisters
was.
was.
Yes.
The other two
sisters-
were pretty much natural.
Okay. Well, I'm
Father,
talking
heart
about
attack,
the
her mother
one-
had a blood
yeah.
clot, and they were in less than like
But
8 hours.
but the sister, the
Yes.
Yeah.
sister,
That was pursued, yeah.
okay.
And that was the only way, a wrongful death suit was the only way we could get the hospital's attention to find out what happened to Elise.
I have so many questions attached to that because I really, maybe I can talk to you afterwards, cause it's too detailed, but I went through a horrendous crime, but the court was involved with a crime in that state.
Oh, dear.
And they've done it to other people so many times, for money and land, and, you know, it was nothing anybody could imagine. It was not, it was so bizarre, it wasn't anything anybody could imagine. And it was stretched out for so many years, and I had all the emotions to deal with and try to figure out, and the crime too. All on me alone. And then I had people that wouldn't believe me, just thought that I had, something was wrong, I'm making it up or whatever. So then you have people that go against you because you can't talk about it.
Yeah.
And it goes farther than that too.
Oh, gosh, how exhausting.
Yeah.
Oh.
And then you try to get help, and the people that are supposed to help, outside of even the court that are connected, are afraid they'll get put locked up or die. So maybe I'll just leave it like that for right now.
Oh, I'm sorry you had to go through
I
that.
had to go through it for, from 97 to 04. And then the fallout after that was over with, and I just could never, there wasn't any way for me to get help.
You had something in the back? Yes, go ahead.
Yeah, there's a quick share and a question for you.
Sure.
It's just, for those of you that are telling stories about being raised, like, I was raised by 2 people like that, and I recently, in the past few years, and there's a meeting that meets in Hilton Head, got involved with adult children of alcoholics in dysfunctional families. It's a 12-step program, and you can heal some of this, and, besides therapy and stuff, so just something to look at. It's called ACA, but Adult Children of Alcoholics in Dysfunctional Families. I think it's like aca.org or whatever, but
Okay.
I've gotten a lot more out of that than all the years of therapy.
Oh my gosh.
So, and
Wow.
there's a meeting at the Yana Club, I think, on Sunday afternoon. So
Well,
just that.
thank you.
But what I wanted to ask you is, me and my sister have long talked about, I wonder if we should write a book about what we all went through, and the generations before us had it worse. Did you have any ramifications, and for you who are writing one too, from writing that, because that's been a concern of ours, is, in today's day and age, they don't think you can write under a pen name as easily and get away with it, that you're not just outing your experience, you're outing everybody else, and that has sort of stopped us from even moving that conversation forward. So I was just curious about any negative blowback from your relationships. I've seen a Pat Conroy interview where he said that it really affected his relationships.
Oh, yeah.
I was curious about
Yeah,
that.
yeah, I know about Pat, I think I know about Pat Conroy's. I only have one living relative left. I wasn't allowed to socialize or get to know my other cousins or uncles and aunts, all that. So I only have one significant relationship, which is my brother. And I told him I was writing the book, and all he said was, that was a really painful time for us. and that's all he said.
Hmm.
So far, I haven't gotten any other blowback.
And all the names are changed, except for immediate family members,
Yeah,
so.
yeah, and we checked with a lawyer too
Yeah.
about,
We did.
statute, but, yeah.
We did. But you should do it, if nothing else. I think it's cathartic.
Yeah.
To start putting it together. I think it does.
Just like in getting it out. And
Yes.
Yeah. It
Or
helped
do it
me.
as fiction. Do a Pat Conroy.
Yeah, but they all knew.
Yeah, that's true. Oh, that's true. They all knew
His
anyway.
mom
Yeah,
used it
that's
in
right.
court to divorce the dad, the same team, so
Yeah.
people are gonna know. It's just something to consider, that I
Yeah.
never thought about.
Yeah.
Anyone else? Well, we thank you all so much.
Yes.
Thank you so much for coming. We really appreciate it.